The buzz. The buzz. The buzz. The buzz.
The buzz is on.
The buzz is on.
The show that gets you up close and personal with some of the hottest stars. Now, here's your host, Novell Jalali.
What's going on, everybody? It's Novell Jalali, and welcome into a very special edition of The Buzz at Buzzworthy Radio. I had the pleasure of sitting down and speaking with Dr. Shahrzad Jalali, who is a trauma expert and a licensed clinician, where we talked about World Suicide Prevention Day as well as September being Suicide Prevention Month. We got into a very thought-provoking conversation on how and when you can notice signs, which can be subtle, on if there's a potential possibility that someone could be thinking about taking their own life, thinking about not wanting to be a part of this world anymore. We go deep into that. We also go deep into the bullying aspect as well for kids in school, impressionable kids, and why they think it's their only recourse but to end their life. And how the schools are not helping these kids when it's brought to their attention. We talked about how that affects the parents, kids, the school, and everybody else around them. I was very fortunate that I was able to sit down and speak to her about this topic that is very, very important to me, and I hope it's very important to you as well. Please take a look at our interview with Dr. Jalali. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Jalali, for being with me today and to talk about a topic that really it's something that's very important to me. It's something that I always talk about every year, especially during the month of September for Suicide Prevention Month. And yesterday was Suicide Prevention Day, and having lost friends to suicide, it's been something that I always wanted to address with everybody, to bring more attention to for a lot of people, not just everyone I know, but those who can spread the word. And I feel like more needs to be done in order to talk about it, because I do feel like there's some type of stigma related to it, especially with men. And men are more likely to commit suicide than women. And I just think not many people like to talk about it, but I want to be that person that breaks that stigma to talk about it. So thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure. I agree with you. It's a topic that deserves a lot of attention, given the increasing rates we're seeing, especially amongst the younger population.
Yes. So what in your for being a trauma expert and a clinical psychologist, what are the signs that you see when a person could potentially be going through some kind of traumatic event that they may not be addressing, but you're noticing something is wrong?
Yes, unresolved trauma keeps the nervous system stuck in survival mode.
Mm,
So instead of feeling safe, the body remains on alert, cycling between hypervigilance, numbness, or emotional overwhelm, essentially. So over time, this erodes someone's sense of hope and self-worth,
mm,
which can increase a risk of suicide. Some of the warning signs we can watch for include withdrawal from loved ones, sudden mood swings,
okay.
hopeless statements like, I don't see the point anymore, giving away belongings, or turning to substances to cope with emotional states. These are red flags that shouldn't be ignored.
That's interesting that that comment that you said, with that statement. I just don't know. I just don't see the point anymore.
Mhm.
There's so many times I've heard that statement from people, and I never thought that that could be a potential trigger.
Mhm.
And it's just interesting that you say that could be something to watch out for. Even the selling of belongings, that's it's something that you don't necessarily think normally, that you thinking of. For me, and call me selfish or maybe naive to it, when you're hearing about, when I just heard that about the selling belongings, you're going like, oh, what if they were having a yard sale? They weren't really doing, anything out of the ordinary. But now when you're saying that into how you're saying it, now it's just like maybe I gotta do a double or a second take on it. And now you have to really examine, is there more of a deeper root cause as to why you're doing this? And now have to pay more attention to the words that goes along with it.
You're very right, because we never know what's going on in somebody else's psyche, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you may say, I don't see the point anymore, but it may not necessarily be attached to a suicidal ideation for you. You may have a completely different take on it. Therefore, when you hear it from someone else, it's not always a red flag.
Yeah.
But these are things that we can potentially be more aware of and maybe dig a little bit deeper when we hear them, because we never know what's going on with someone.
Today marks I'm gonna get my math wrong, probably the 24th
Fourth,
anniversary
yes,
of the September 11th attacks. And
correct.
one of the things that there was a point that was brought to my attention about this is that there are certain events that could
Mm-hmm.
potentially trigger somebody that would eventually, God forbid, want to take their own life. This in particular, because the
Hmm.
PTSD from survivors in this, I've met September 11th people who work to save the lives from the people that were in the Twin Towers and the surrounding areas. I've in my line of work, and just to hear their story, they've they did something heroic, they did something miraculous, but behind closed doors, no, they don't feel that way.
Hmm.
And some felt survivors' guilt, um, and then others, it's still very hard for them to get past. And every time that it's brought up, it's bringing, I don't want to say sense of dread, but it feels like that weight has not been lifted off of them, and it's something that doesn't go away. So I do understand the point that there are certain events in life that could be a trigger point in order to have their minds go in this direction, whether it's something like this, what happened 24 years ago, or even something simple like they lost a loved one on this day because of something that didn't have to do with the September 11th attacks. This is just like something that happens throughout the course of life. And um, anything that could be a traumatic event that happens, it could bring them back into this shell of a person. And that kind of ties back into where I feel like that I don't see the point anymore could probably have an effect on why we would have to see more to it with that person, especially if we knew that that's what they were going through.
Yes, I actually just did a interview with NTD television about this dynamic this morning, and we talk about how trauma isn't just stored in our memory, it's stored in our body. So anniversaries or even seasons can act as unconscious reminders, reigniting the nervous system's sense of danger. Life transitions can play the same role. Sometimes breakups, retirements, or moving can shake our foundations and bring old wounds to the surface, even if we thought we moved past them, actually.
Yeah, and I think more for me, I've always felt, and again, this is probably my naivete in the works in here. A lot of the time, I thought about our military men and women,
Hmm.
especially when they come home, as being as being the people that we would. look at the most, especially because we hear a lot of stories about them suffering from PTSD
Mhm.
because when they were serving our country and what they have seen and what they have experienced, I felt prone to them in order to look at the signs of what they could be going through and are they experiencing
Mhm.
something in their psyche, but you never really think about it when it's home
Yes.
because you don't think that there are times you really don't think that there's anything that's going on, and it's just very upsetting sometimes to me when I think about it because when I lost one of my friends, and this is another thing for me that I'm sure you've heard in conversations, there was that instance where you were thinking about that person and you wanted to call them and you didn't, and then the next day you hear this happened, which is what happened to me. I literally was thinking about this person and I said I wanted to call him because there was just something in my mind that said I needed to call you, but I didn't do it. And then the next day I heard he passed away.
I'm very sorry for your loss. I can imagine how painful it must have been for you.
I still miss him to this day, and he was such a good person. He was such a good friend, and um but I think that's also that guilt that I felt and still feel because a part of me feels like, what if I did pick up the phone and call him? Would he still be here? And I'm sure
Mhm.
you hear that from plenty of people who probably have went through the same thing. What do you say to people about that when they bring that to your attention?
Yes, unfortunately, when something like this happens, most of us go into what could I have done to prevent it?
Hmm.
And it's a very normal reaction to have to a situation of this sort. The mind needs to have closure around something that's painful for us. I mean, this happens not just with people taking their lives, but any kind of traumatic event. Let's say you were in a car accident, you will replay that in your head a million times, thinking,
Yeah.
had I just turned left, had I just stopped, had I slowed down, you want to come to this realization that you had more power in the dynamic than you actually had. And sometimes, yes, that's true. I think it's good to learn from a situation and say, next time around, if I feel like this, maybe I'll act on it. Maybe my intuition is trying to speak to me. But other than learning a lesson from it, ruminating over it and going to our shame and guilt doesn't really do much for us because it will eventually walk us down the same path as, despising ourselves and going into more negative feelings that can lead down a dark path. So when these norms come up for us, all we want to do is we want to take that message that they're trying to portray to us. In your case, it could be that you need to trust your intuition more, maybe act on it
Yeah.
a little bit more, because we do have these emotions that sometimes are trying to nudge us in a particular direction, but life is so busy that we tend to override them, or we haven't learned how to listen to them, essentially.
I agree with that. I mean, this was probably about 7 years ago now,
Mhm.
and my math could be a little bit off on that, but still, it was still several years ago when this took place. And it's interesting that you're saying I need to trust my intuition more. One of my good friends literally tells me now, she says to me, "Your intuition is on point,
Mhm.
like when it comes to people." And you saying I need to act on that more, I feel like I've been acting on that more since then, and
Mhm.
it seems to have been working. And I do appreciate that I now listen and trust it more because it hasn't let me down so far. So
Mhm.
there was an interesting story too where I had a dream about one of my best friends, and it wasn't a bad dream. It was like just reconnecting with him, um, because while I wouldn't say we lost touch, but we haven't seen each other for quite a bit, like the way that we used to. And it was just like a dream where we were at his house. We were having a party. We were having a good time. We were just talking, catching up, and kind of things like that. And it was like one of those things where I immediately texted him and his wife and told them how much I love and missed them and everything. And it was probably the best thing that I ever could have done, because I feel like if I hadn't, then I don't think our bond could have been strengthened and then it ever could have been before. So I agree completely 100% that if you are feeling something in your gut and you trust that feeling, act on it.
Mhm.
Because if you don't, there's a possibility you could regret it in the end. So I thank you for that, because that really that helped me. So, um, one other point I want to bring up before I get to my final question for you, so I want to bring this up, is the I don't know how much you have spoken or dealt with when it comes to children and
Mhm.
they commit suicide because they've been bullied. That's another thing that I'm a big proponent on, is
Mhm.
anti-bullying, which October is Bullying Prevention Month.
Okay.
And I am also a big advocate in supporting anti-bullying. I always wear the anti-bullying shirt every month in October, um, every year, I should say. And I was bullied as a kid. I was bullied throughout school, but for me, it was different because I took that bullying and I used it to my advantage to strengthen myself as a human, strengthen
Mhm.
myself as a man, and able to stand up for myself in adulthood. And sometimes I still struggle. Don't get me wrong. I think all of us do. But it was I feel like that was the fight I needed to make me stand up for myself.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, there are a lot of kids that don't have that strength and that willpower and that mindset. And unfortunately, we lose them because the bullying is just too much. They feel like,
Mhm.
as you said, they have no way out. What do you say, or what have you seen, or what is your thoughts when it comes to kids having to go through this, and especially now since the school year just started? What do you say to the parents and even the kids when they're having to deal with such a thing during school? Because a lot of the time
Mhm.
when we hear stories like this, the school doesn't help them.
Yes.
The school doesn't do anything to alleviate the problem. And they're pretty much like the second home for children,
Mhm.
because they're there most of the day. They're there from early morning until around 3 in the afternoon, roughly. So you get them for most of the day, most of the early afternoon, and they're not doing anything to protect those kids. What do you say to all of this, to kind of put it in the frame of the minds for the parents when they're sending their kids off to school, and we just had yesterday
Yes.
another school shooting in Colorado.
Mhm.
It's just there's just so much, and I just feel like, what can we do? Like, what is it that we can do as a society?
Yes, unfortunately, it's much bigger than we like to admit. It is a huge problem that we are dealing with. I would say the most powerful step is to listen without judgment and show up consistently. Ask directly if they're thinking about suicide. People often think if I ask, I'm putting thoughts in their head or it makes them uncomfortable to do so. But research shows this doesn't put the idea in their head. It actually opens the door for honesty. Encourage
Mm,
professional help, connect them with hotlines, therapy, and if possible, remove immediate means of harm to the best of your ability.
yeah.
Sometimes just knowing someone cares opens up a different avenue to you that you feel like you're connected. Not that parents don't care or they aren't connected, but they get caught up in their lives and they don't exactly know what's happening in their kid's mind. They just believe that my child is in school and they're doing fine and they're safe.
Yeah.
Communities can normalize talking about trauma and mental health so that it doesn't feel shameful to seek help. Peer support groups, crisis response programs, and trauma informed workplaces can create safety nets, actually, including culture and faith based organizations. They're very important because people tend to go to these places first if they're
Mm.
involved with these communities. So there are a lot of resources. I just want to encourage people to use them. You pointed out to something that really resonated with me. You talked about how you were bullied and you used it to your advantage. I actually had a book that came out yesterday that I talk about this dynamic in. The book is called The Fire That Makes Us. It's about trauma and learning how to incorporate it into your being and use it to your advantage versus letting it ruin your life, essentially.
Mm.
And as the title alludes, we go through these fires and they can destroy us, but they can also forge us into something a lot more powerful. They can expand us. So, not everything bad that happens to us will define us. We can actually take that and use it to our advantage and grow. So, encouraging people to develop this mindset and see past what is happening to them in the moment is very powerful.
Thank you for sharing that, because that was actually going to be my next question, was about the book. And you it is a nice segue into that, and I really do appreciate you talking about that because, yeah, I the fire was real, and as we used to say a lot of years ago, the struggle was real,
Mhm.
and it it taught me a lot about different humans. It really did, because I tried to see the best in everybody, and that's hard. And it proved how hard it could be during that time.
Mhm.
And it opened up my eyes a little bit to just realize exactly how malicious people can be to another person when you never really thought that that was a possibility. And for me, just taking that hatred that they spewed at me during that time, and just doing it just because they wanted to do it. I just basically I felt that it was gonna put more of a bigger shell around me, where I really didn't want to be around people, because at one point it really was that way. And then when I started working, especially when you had to work with other people, you have to coexist. And, fortunately, I say fortunately now. If you asked me this back then in my late teens, I would have said unfortunately. But fortunately, you had to work with people, coexist with people, and work together and make friendships at work, which is what happened. And I think it opened a door to seeing that there were a lot of other possibilities out there. There were a lot of things that I didn't really know that really existed for me, and that I could have friends. I could be better than what I was. And that's how it manifested a little, to where the shell was broken. The shell is still there. I would say, but it's definitely cracked to a point where it's open enough to where I'm always open, but not fully cracked enough to know when I need to shut it. Um, so I think for just those experiences, as you said, having to go through those fires that I've been through really helped me elevate myself as the person that I am today. So I always say I'm grateful for everything that I had experienced. And those questions that everybody asks, would you go back in time and do this all over again? No. I would go
Mhm.
back in time and relive it again, yes, but I would not change anything. Because if as you said, with the what ifs, you can sit here and say, with the what ifs, what if I did this differently? Would this happen in my life now? Me, I'm not looking at that. I'm going, like, I know that if I did things differently, I would not be where I am right now. I already know that for a fact, 100%. So that's why I wouldn't change it. I'm very happy with how things turned out in my life and who's in my life because of that. And that's why I look at my bullying situation as a gift because it really helped. It helped me grow, and I thank it for that. I thank those bullies for that because they didn't tear me down, and if any case, they did the opposite. So, as I like to say, the haters do like to watch, and they hate watching you persevere. And unfortunately for them, I am, and I'm proud to say that it was because of them. So, tip my hats off to them. But I really want to thank you for coming by and talking with me and even letting out my own stories and questions surrounding this because this is such an important topic for people to discuss. And it's an important topic for me that I wanted to discuss. This is the first time I've ever been talking about it on my show. And as soon as I was asked about it, I immediately said yes because it is a topic that has been dear to my heart. And for the fact that I've never had discussed this here on my show, and this is the first time I'm doing it. This was such a nice breakthrough and to open that door. And I would love to have you back and have more conversations regarding this and other topical topics like we talked about bullying prevention month next month. This definitely I would love to have you back. So thank you so much for being a part of it.
Thank you for having me. I'm very sorry you had to go through that, and no one should ever face anything like that, especially when you're in your younger years and trying to figure life out. Unfortunately, people don't always operate from their best selves, and hurt people tend to hurt people. And this is what we see when people are mean to us or bully us or hurt us. And sometimes this takes us down, but in your case, you've actually taken it to your advantage and grown from it. So good
I
for you.
realized I realized that because I brought up the point before that the schools were to help you. I realized they weren't helping me. I'm going to be honest. I mean, they didn't do anything to help me. I actually had friends who stood up for me at that time.
Mhm.
And I thank them for that. And I still, to this day, every time I think about it, I always think of the one in particular who did. And she's still very dear to me because of that. And
That's a very good point, to just acknowledging that even one person can make a difference. So when you see these things around you, always speak up and fight for your truth. Don't let this happen around you, because then you become part of the problem instead of
yeah,
becoming part of the solution.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you, I f- and as you just said, it's very tough because you're trying to find yourself because
Mhm.
at that young age, you know, I didn't think that I would start. I guess that's why people call me an old soul, and I realized how much you had to save yourself because no one was going to save you,
Correct.
and then there was that one person who did, and I like I said, I thank them for that, but it's just I do agree that there are signs there where people are going through those situations that we're not seeing. Obviously, with Columbine that happened in '99, the Virginia Tech shooting that happened when he had the videos, he had the notebooks and everything. There's
Yes.
something that's there that it's getting overlooked, but they knew it was there, and I think that's my issue with all of this is
Mhm.
that there was something that was out there that people would have noticed, especially in those situations, because after the event happened, that's when they come out and said, well, they had these books, they had these things, they
Yeah.
said these things. But you knew that they said it, but you still didn't act on it. You still didn't do anything.
We override it. We potentially think it's not that big of a deal, kind of to tie it back into how we started this conversation.
Yeah.
Someone may say to you, I can't do this anymore. And you may just think, oh, okay, they're having a tough day, right? So maybe I think what should come out of our conversation today is for all of us to be a lot more mindful of what we see and hear around us, and to potentially assign more value to what we see, and realize our own role in prevention of many negative events that can be happening around us.
That's a great ending point. That's basically it, guys. You just gotta listen. You gotta listen. You gotta pay attention. Don't half-ass the conversation, please. Like, because
Mhm.
as she just said, you never know. You could be that one person. You could be that one person that's gonna turn another person's life around. And you may not think that you were helping them, but in actuality, you are. You are.
Yes,
Just by being present and just being in the moment and listening to them. That's all you gotta do.
yes.
That's all you gotta do. Dr. Jalali, thank you so much. I really
Thank you for
appreciate it.
having me. My pleasure.
Thank you.
You. Bye bye.
Bye. If you or someone you know needs to speak to somebody, always be aware that you are not alone. The Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is always here to help you as well as us. But if you don't feel like coming to us, there's always someone on the other end that is willing to listen. Just remember these three simple digits, 988. Dial that on your phone if you ever feel the need to talk to someone.
Stay in the know. Catch up on all the Buzz podcasts and videos at buzzworthyradiocast.com. Keep getting the latest buzz with Buzzworthy Radio, now on Amazon Music.